A couple of years ago, I found myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off work at my student internship in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it had been snowing all day. Now, for all you guys who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when it's even a snowy day, no matter how light it is. And you also know that grocery stores are literally raided the night before. I decided to go out and get some groceries to enjoy with my girlfriend, since the mayhem had ended and only people like me who had trucks or all-terrain vehicles could go out. I went into Walmart and got groceries I needed and started my way back to my truck. It had started to snow harder and there was already about 5 to 7 inches on the ground, and it was around 12 in the afternoon. I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies for the next couple of days. Just then, as I almost reached my truck, I was jolted by the act of someone grabbing my arm. As I turned around, I saw an older looking lady, maybe 5'6". She asked me if I had a cigarette. Now, I don't smoke, so I told her no I didn't, and turned back to my truck. Again, she gently tugged on my arm and then told me that she just got here from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog, and she was here for breast cancer treatment and wanted money for a hotel. Again, I honestly told her I had no money on me, which I purposely do because I don't like donating to people's drug habits and would rather get people food myself. It's just easier that way. At this point, she said, "Do you know the area well?" wanting to get out of the situation. So I said no I didn't, which was a lie. Thinking she'd now leave me alone, she then asked, "Oh, okay. Well, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet up with my granddaughter and her dog, who are in the hotel lobby waiting? It's right up the road here. Look, I can show you." Me being a Christian and was always taught to help out others, even though everything at that moment told me to deny this woman again, I told her sure, since I was raised on the rule, never judge a book by its cover. Plus, being a 6-foot male, I figured I could take care of things if they got dicey. So she jumped in my truck against all odds, and the next thing I know, she's smoking a cigarette in my truck, and I told her politely to please put it out. Being nervous, I missed my first red flag when she asked me for a cigarette, since she obviously had one. She obliged and threw the cigarette out of the window to my dismay. At the moment of going through the worst case scenario in my head, I noticed her fumbling through her purse searching for something and looking out of the corner of her eye at me, at which I told her, "Just so you know, I have a gun in my truck, don't try anything fucking crazy." Now, I did have a gun, but it was a shotgun that I had neglected to get out of my back seat a couple of days earlier, and in reality this would do me no good if she pulled out a gun at that moment. At this, she stopped messing around in her purse and pulled out her cell phone in her pocket. She looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money for my friends and that." At this point in time, red flags were firing off again, but never judge a book by its cover, stupidly, kept running through my mind. So I told her that this was fine, but we had to make it quick because I needed to get home. At that moment, she dialed someone on the phone and said, "Yeah, the guy's coming over to bring me to get my stuff. You are ready, right?" At that point, I asked her to talk to the person. When I answered the phone, a man who sounded like he'd been chain smoking since birth said, "Hello." I started asking him questions like, "What's your name?" and asked him if he indeed did know of any hotels nearby. He seemed to stumble over his words though. Then he said, "I have to go." At this point, I should have gotten a clue and kicked her out of my car. Especially after watching so many horror movies, this is when the person goes against their gut and pays for it. But for fear of her actually telling the truth and making me feel like a horrible person, I stupidly decided to go on. At this point, we turned down the street and I saw a cop car sitting on the other side of the road. I wanted to drop her off with the cop, but I would be terrible if she was actually telling the truth, so I passed the cop again. With this weird eerie smile on her face, she said, "Glad he's there now, I feel safe." Now, as we entered the apartment complex, I saw how run down it was. It looked to be a place where heavy drug traffic was going down. Just a very unsettling place, even during the snowstorm. As I parked outside the place, she was just with a friend and said, "Okay, I'm going to the guy and we're going to be back." At this point, I was very unsettled by everything. Things just didn't seem right. She saw my facial expression of wanting to get the heck out of the dodgy place, and at this she sneered at me, saying something along the lines of me being a terrible person if I left her there. In this weather, under her condition. After this, I got mad. After all, I went out of my way to help her. As I waited, starting to think about how that things could happen, what she brought back was not a gun, even worse. At that moment, I saw 3 guys coming towards my truck. I realised things were not right. She had set me up to rob me or something because these guys were big. One of them had something behind his back which I couldn't see. At that moment, I put it in reverse and took off. Thank God I was in a 4-wheel drive. I looked back to see there was another hidden guy and there was a crowbar behind the guy's back which he tried to throw at my truck. I don't know what would have happened to me, but now I look back on it, I see how dumb and blind I was. There was no hotel anywhere close to the area I was in. The nearest hotel was a 20-minute drive away. Had I waited for the guys to get to my truck, they would probably have beat me and robbed me. Or even worse. A couple of months later, I told a co-worker this story, and he told me that a year ago some lady tried the same thing on him, but he declined altogether. Smart move. So, horrible lady who lied about having breast cancer to trick me into awful things. I hate you and hope you die.
When I was a kid, around 8 years old, I took karate lessons at my local mini-mall. Just recalling the events of this story fills me with dread as to what could have happened. So yeah, I remember that my lessons were twice a week and an hour long, and my mom would drop me off and pick me up whenever it was over. Most parents would sit in the lobby and wait for their kid's lesson to be over, but my mom would always go shopping or something to kill the time instead. There was a guy that was in the lobby almost every time I had a lesson. He looked older, probably in his 50s, dark hair, long beard, and mustache. I always assumed that he was another one of the kids' parents, but I never saw him drop someone off or pick them up. Something was strange about this, but my 8-year-old brain didn't piece it together that it was weird that some guy would just hang out and watch kids in the lobby of a karate center. So one day I graduated up to a green belt, or yellow belt, or something, doesn't really matter. And my mom dropped me off at the same time that she always did. However, she didn't realize that I was in a different group of lessons now, and I wasn't able to participate in the class. So instead, I decided that I would look for her in the mini-mall. The guy started to follow me. He came right up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder, told me that my mom told him to find me because my sister was in the hospital. He described what my mom looked like, what my sister looked like, and that I should get into his van so that he could take me to my parents. I remembered that I started to cry and followed him because I really believed him when he said that my sister was in the hospital. I asked him what happened, and he told me that there was a car accident. I asked him who he was, and I just remember he said something like he was friends with my mom. I remember that this didn't sit right with me because my mom never talked to him when she dropped me off, and I didn't recall them ever saying one word to each other. His van was parked a couple of stores down from the karate center by the sidewalk. I remember being something like 20 feet from the van when I looked behind me and saw my mom shopping through one of the windows in a JCPenney. At this point, the guy was holding my hand and leading me to his van. But I stopped when I saw my mom, and he started to pull me and said that we had to hurry. I remember pointing at my mom and saying to him, "My mom's right there." He gave me another tug, and I resisted and started to scream. He let go of me instantly, got into his van, and sped off in a hurry. In that moment, I realized that I was almost kidnapped. I remembered all the stranger danger warnings that were given in school, but I stupidly thought that because this guy could describe my mom and my sister, he must know them. Instead, he must have been watching me and my family for weeks before he decided to make his move. I remember running into the store, tears streaming down my face, and just giving my mom a huge hug. I tried to tell her what happened, but she just yelled at me and smacked me upside the head for missing my karate lesson. She took me back to the karate center. My sensei explained to her that my lessons were at a different time now that I have gone up a belt color. He probably explained this to my mom before, but as you can tell by reading this, I didn't have the most responsible parents. I tried telling my mom about the guy who said he was her friend, but she ignored me. She said something like he must have thought I was another kid or something. God, my mom is such a fucking idiot. But I was too young to linger on it or do anything about it, so that memory just festered in me for years. And every year that went by, I became a little wiser and a little more terrified of what could have happened to me if I had gotten in that van.
This all happened when I was only 5 years old and has been traumatizing me ever since. I never told anyone about this until now. Up until I was in kindergarten, my mother used to put me in daycares or at neighbours' houses so that she and my dad could go to work. One summer, my mother asked this lady to babysit me for the summer while she went to work. I don't know what possessed my mother to choose this lady. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was pure stupidity. Maybe it was just a combination of both. Either way, my mother entrusted this lady with me for the rest of the day. This lady had no business being around children, let alone being responsible for them. I honestly believe that this lady was an alcoholic, mainly because the way she looked sick and tired. Her eyes were always red and her breath smelled like puke every time she spoke. The worst thing, however, was that she was almost never around, basically leaving me unsupervised for literally hours. The lady would only ever be there when my mum would pick me up or drop me off. Otherwise, the lady was locked up in her room. Once she had me clean her bedroom as punishment for breaking a few of her picture frames. I didn't even break them. I walked in her bedroom only to find several glass bottles strewn all over the floor. This lady had two nieces who were staying with her for the summer. I don't remember their names nor if they were sisters or cousins, but I do remember their ages. The younger niece was around 8 years old and the older niece was around 11 years old. The nieces were the most horrible children that I've ever had the misfortune of meeting. They were absolutely disgusting. The younger niece was a horrible, rude brat. The older niece was a manipulative liar and a complete sadist. When I first met them, I was friendly with them, but soon things began to change. The older niece began bullying me first, the younger would join in, first name calling, then teasing. Then it was stealing and blaming things on me. In just a week, things had escalated to the point where that both of the nieces began to physically abuse me. The older niece was a narcissist, the younger niece liked dumping dirt on my food, on my head, and pulling out my hair. She once set my hair on fire. She also liked to steal my lunches, spit on my food, pee on the floors, break stuff, blame it on me. The older niece looked crazier and liked to throw glass bottles at me. She once put broken glass in my cereal and almost tricked me into eating it. When I asked her why she did that, she said, "I wanted to see what would happen if I ate it." The older niece also liked to push me into walls and furniture and drag me by my hair, just so she could beat me up. I couldn't fight her off because she was much bigger than me. Plus, the younger niece would join in and beat me up as well. Every day I would come home bruised, cuts and stuff in my hair. My nights were spent trying to pick out the glass of my skin, bandaging my cuts and washing out whatever was thrown on my head that day. My parents never even noticed once, not even when the bruises and cuts were on my faces and arms. I also began to experience panic attacks at this point. Every morning I would wake up and cry hysterically, knowing that I would have to go back to that house and be stuck with those nieces all day. It was only then that my mother finally started to notice something was up. One morning my mother asked me why I hated going to that house. I told her about how the girls were beating me up, throwing stuff in my hair. I showed her the cuts and bruises, as well as the burn marks from when they set my ponytail on fire. My mother took off work that day and drove to the house to confront the lady and her nieces. She showed the lady my bruises and cuts and demanded an explanation. The lady called over her nieces and had them tell my mother their side of the story, if that's what they want to call it. The nieces had the cheek to claim that I was hurting myself and breaking things to get them in trouble, that they didn't know why I hated them so much and that they still wanted to be friends. Believe it or not, my mother believed them and got angry at me for lying. She made me apologise to the nieces and the lady for my behaviour. She then took me home to punish me. From that day forward, my mother ignored whatever I was saying in whenever she picked me up. No matter how bruised or cut up I was, all she assumed was that I was getting attention. So I continued to endure endless abuse. And the nieces continued to get away with all of it. I think they wanted to get away with it. I wanted to leave in any way that I possibly could. I wanted my mother to believe in me. I wanted them to, all of this situation, to just stop. I had enough. But I knew I couldn't make her. The only thing that I could do was, well, nothing. So I began to zone out and become physically numb. Eventually, I got so numb that I was practically left with nothing. By late summer, I had been subject to 3 months of this. This was also around the time when the lady set up a swimming pool. One day, the lady decided to allow all 3 of us to use her swimming pool, probably so that we didn't bother her anymore. She asked my mother one morning if I would bring a bathing suit so that I could swim in the pool. My mother told the lady that I didn't know how to swim yet, so she wasn't sure if I should go. The lady assured my mother that she would supervise me to make sure I stayed in the shallow end. My mum had me pack my bathing suit and brought me to the house. For once in a long time, I felt optimistic and happy. The thought of swimming in a pool excited me a bit, so I looked forward to it, even with the nieces involved. When I got there, the lady told me to change into my bathing suit and meet her and the nieces by the pool. When I got there, the lady said I had to listen to some rules before I went in. The lady told me to stay in the shallow end of the pool. She also told the girls that I didn't know how to swim and that I wasn't allowed in the deep end. I mean, yeah, I was even surprised at this. She then went into the house to make a phone call and left, thus leaving me and the girls unattended. Once she was gone, The nieces started to walk into the deep end of the pool, but strangely didn't jump in. Instead, they just sat there on the edge of it. I went in the shallow end of the pool and played by myself. Surprisingly, they left me alone for about 15 minutes. I was splashing the water, blowing bubbles, having a great time. For the first time in weeks, I smiled and laughed. I was having so much fun that I even forgot that the nieces were around. That was until I heard them call out my name. The nieces decided to taunt me for not going into the deep end. They kept saying that I was chicken for being afraid of going into the deep end of the pool, and that I was a big baby if I didn't go into their side of the pool, so I decided to ignore them and keep playing. After a few minutes of being teased, I had enough and left the pool. I guess this didn't sit well with either of the girls, because as soon as I got out of the pool, the younger niece ran inside and locked me out. I ran to the glass door and pulled it to try and get it open, while the younger niece stuck her tongue out at me from behind the glass. It was then that I felt two arms wrap around my head and shoulders. The older niece had come from behind and grabbed me. She started grabbing me by my hair, away from the door and towards the pool. The next thing I knew, I was tossed in the water. I panicked as soon as I realised that I was in the deep end of the pool. I tried desperately to stay above the water, but I couldn't. The few times I did, I heard the girls laughing at me. The older niece jumped into the pool and nearly landed on top of me. I felt her grab onto my head and pull it down. At one point, she was dragging me across the pool. I knew this because my knees were scraping across the bottom of the pool. I was flailing about, desperately trying to fight her off and get above water. It wasn't until I felt my hand hit something that the other girl finally let go of me. By that point, we were in the shallow end of the pool, so I managed to get myself floating and head above water. I surfaced to hear the sounds of the lady yelling at the older niece, hailing in pain. The lady charged into the water and yanked me out of the pool, and she stared at me with bloodshot eyes. She pushed me into a chair and stared me down with her bloodshot eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you? I thought I told your stupid ass not to go into that side of the pool. Now look what you've done," she yelled. The lady pointed at the older nieces, and one of them had blood running down her nose and was still crying. Though coughs and tears, I tried to tell her that the older niece had thrown me into the pool, but the lady wasn't having any of it. She demanded that I apologise for hitting her niece in the face. I refused to and started screaming, "No, I hate her." Then the lady got into my face and started yelling at me. She told me that I was the most stupid girl for not listening to her rules, that I had nothing but trouble for both of her and her nieces, that my mother left me with her because she hated me. I yelled back and told her that I wasn't stupid and that her nieces were mean, that I hate them so much and wish they would all die. The lady flew into a rage and slapped me across the face for saying that. I was too shocked even to cry at this point. The lady then took the opportunity to tell me how wrong I was about her nieces, what a horrible child I am, and how dare I tattle on her nieces for my mistakes to get them in trouble. How dare I not follow her instructions about the pool. How dare I attack her niece who was trying to save me. How could I be so ungrateful to her nieces who I owe my life to? How could I claim that her nieces were bad children when they were really sweet and innocent girls? That I would never be as good as her nieces, and that because of my behaviour I would never be welcome at her home again. The lady then stormed into the house and called my mother to pick me up. When my mother got there, she was absolutely pissed. She immediately yelled at me for making her get in trouble with her boss for taking the day off to come and get me. She profoundly and profusely apologised to the lady and her nieces and took me home. As soon as I got home, my mother punished me and told my dad what happened. My father was fuming and lectured me about listening to people, as well as not being a brat. I was grounded for a month. I haven't been to that house since that incident, nor heard from the lady or her nieces. I drive past that house on my way to work and I get this sick feeling in my stomach every time I see it. I never told my parents what truly happened that day. I fear that they'll simply dismiss it as kids just being kids and me being a brat. I've had years to think about it and come up with an answer as to why this happened. Every time I think about it, this creepy feeling pops up in my head. The feeling that it was more than just an